Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is that practice is designed to move things around. So that makes sense. Sounds like you're maybe doing too much of it. Um, but probably most importantly is that you should probably combine it with a tranquility or grounding practice. And the other way to do that would be to do it in the same sit. So those are your two choices, like alternate or have a sort of warm up and cool down phase to your to your practice, right? So one thing that works really well for a lot of people is doing some sort of chanting after, because that'll balance your mind. But if you've been working at it a while and it's kind of working in that it's, uncovering things, making you see things more clearly, you might want to, I would just suggest maybe doing it less. So maybe doing it a
So
couple times a
it's
week. And then what you're going to find, but this is just true in general, right? So that course is divided into like 3 sections. So the Samskara Release is in this like pranic movement section. But we talk about it in our therapy training, like a Vijnana Maya Kosha, right? Like moving stuff around, hopefully uncovering some unconscious stuff and moving it to the conscious. But before you get to any of that, there's 8 tranquility meditations. Not that you need to do all 8, but they're just different kinds of options. And those are like spine breath, that bija mantra we've done in the course, Om Japa, Om Namah Shivaya Japa, rotational body consciousness, and probably 1 or 2 of those will like land as a really easy, with practice, tranquility meditation. And tranquility states are when you move out of your normal consciousness. And it's that feeling, which you've probably gotten because you've been doing this meditation, where you're sitting and meditating and you're doing your technique or whatever, and it feels like you're still kind of conscious, like you're thinking things and all the things we do. And then usually around, if you get proficient sometime, but probably towards the end of 20 minutes, right? Like 15 minutes in, you feel different. Like you feel a little less time aware. There's a little bit of spaciousness in your mind. Sometimes people feel light in their body. So when I say grounding, I mean, it's not necessarily like I feel grounded. It's more my vrittis aren't attacking me at the same rate. The technique does matter in terms of the result of the meditation. They all have a similarity, but like one technique that's in the same genre, for instance, is that like chakra meditation that's like bottom up. That's actually in the same ballpark as that Samskara meditation, but the difference is it will probably not stir up the stuff in your Vijnana Maya Kosha as much or as quickly. So there's different ways to get that sort of pranic awareness that feels more integrating versus stuff that moves around your deep-seated karmic knots. And you can't always be moving those around unless you are going to quit life and become a monk, because you won't be able to function at some point, right? Because you get more and more agitated, more and more aware. So I'm not saying there's one trick, but there's this sort of trick to managing your meditation practice that's important in a long-term kind of way. If you're like a family, like a householder, just with jobs and people and things, but you can't always be digging it up, relying on that one technique a little too much. And so there's more techniques. And it's a good and a bad thing. I mean, it's a bad thing because you're feeling anxious, and it's a good thing because, if your goal is to like move stuff around so you can deal with it, you're definitely probably doing that. But there's an energetic piece to it that's all upper that can be a little, especially for a really pitta person. If you choose to do meditations that uncover your stuff, then you also have to choose dealing with that stuff, which you may or may not want to do today. So that's up to you. If you see, it all comes from these meditation traditions that are, remember, they're all, or most of them are based on you not living the life you're living now. So it's not that you shouldn't meditate, but it's like we really have to take into consideration each meditation's effects and how to sort of like manage it as you go through your personal evolution. You know, because you probably don't want to spend like 9 hours a day in therapy right now at this point in your life, right? So maybe an hour a week, you know. So you have to sort of manage how you're going to unearth stuff. And everybody has a different, you know, kind of tolerance, and, you know, some people run more high octane than others. You know, you could even argue that you really should master your tranquility meditation techniques before you do it at all. That kind of meditation, because that's like an essential skill, you know. But you're in control of the whole thing. You just need enough techniques to do it. Like you get to decide. Either, but I will say that yoga anxiety is like the #1 thing, and it's going to be your easiest thing. And everybody with a mental health condition has anxiety. So if you go too specific, you're going to have a really hard time. You know, if you do yoga for bipolar disorder, you're going to have 3 people there, you know, not because there aren't people who need help, but if you do yoga for anxiety, you don't know who's, you know, everybody could show up, really. So just marketing wise, I would probably stick with that. I did the same peaceful weight loss workshop in the same location for like in one place in New York for 12 years, literally every 6 months for 12 years. Because you're not trying to get repeat people, right? So the other thing that's really good is that people keep seeing your name attached to this mental health yoga thing. So that's how they'll think of you, if that's what you're interested in working with. They'll be like, oh, Christine, the anxiety lady, I'm going to go see her because I'm having a hard time with X, Y, or Z. You know, and a lot of it's random. Like you'll do it again and you'll have terrible turnout, and then a lot of it's like where you do it and all those things. One thing that worked for me was, I mean, I was always looking for places with bigger and bigger mailing lists. So I did stuff with ashrams and yoga centers, and yeah, you sort of work your way up the yoga ladder to bigger and bigger places just because they have bigger mail lists, you know,
Right.
because that's the thing. And then just the other thing you could do is do something regular that would allow you to, like monthly or something, and then that would allow you to kind of advertise it and put it out to your email list.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reminds people that you're there. So some of the benefits, like you saw, I mean, you got a client, so you can imagine if you got a client every time you did something, you'd have a lot of clients, you know. So that's how I think about it. I mean, I don't know, it's different for everybody, but I mean, I traveled around doing the same workshop for years, and then I would go back. It's like being on tour. I had been you're a musician too, so I'd been in a band, so I was like, I'll just do it the same way. I'll just go on tour and then I'll go on tour again. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's what I did, you know, and it kind of spread the word, you know, especially because I would do locally, I would do like New York and then New Jersey and Connecticut, and it's sort of in the same radius, but there's a lot of people there. So
Right.
even in Manhattan, I would do like uptown and downtown, you know. And there's so much anxiety. Literally, we could all do yoga for anxiety workshops forever, and there still wouldn't be enough yoga for anxiety workshops. It's funny. It's not this idea that we're supposed to have solved all our own problems is, you know, of course, it's always like nice to have an inspiring story, you know, or like a big event, but like really people slowly improve their situation, right? And it's not where you are, but it's what you've done to get where you are. So I think sometimes we get confused, like I should be less anxious to teach the anxiety, but it's really am I less anxious now? You know, have these practices helped me? Have I seen the results? Can I honestly say that these are useful tools for people? That's all we should be thinking about. If you think about it more like a physical thing, then it makes, it's harder with the mental health stuff because you're more likely to feel like an imposter, right? But like, if you like, I don't know, hurt your hip and lost 90% of your range of motion and then recovered it back, so you're only down 20%. And you're not going to say to yourself, I can't teach this workshop because like I didn't restore the last 20. So clearly these techniques didn't work. It's more like that, right? Like, I mean, it's just we're at where we're at. I mean, the important thing is to not, it's also a good, I mean, since you said it's a business conversation, it's a way better business model to be transparent. People like love it. People love getting honest reflections from somebody on how things have helped them or their status. Whenever I see yoga teachers fronting, it's really common, but it's especially common because like there's so many young yoga teachers now, so they don't even know they're doing it. I don't blame them, but you know, you go take classes with 22-year-olds who are feeling like imposters just because they're young, you know, it's not on them, but you can see them sort of like trying to play the role, you know, of the yoga teacher. And I'm always like, oh, you don't have to do that. I don't say it, but I'm thinking it, like you could just be yourself. Like we all know you're 22 and have only had 22 years of experience on this earth. You're not supposed to know something insane. It's just an asana class. So it's sort of like that, you know. But it is hard. The other thing I'll say, it is hard in the beginning when you haven't had a lot of clients to not feel a little bit like an imposter because you're teaching something that you have faith in, but you haven't seen work a million times. So like, I don't feel that way anymore at all, but I've also just had a lot of clients. So, but I remember, you know, the first like 5 years I was practicing, like people come in and I'd be like, am I qualified to work with this person? Like all the thoughts would race through your head, right? Like, am I sort of good enough to work with this person? And of course, this is obvious, but you kind of don't really realize it till later. The answer is you have no idea until you've worked with them. Like you don't know till you're working with them whether you're going to be useful, right? Like you just don't know. So getting comfortable with that's a little bit of a thing. You know, you're making an offering, you know, you're just making an offering of teachings and information and ideas. As long as you present them like that, I think be less nervous, you know. I would say I'm most anxious about, probably I'm most anxious about those things compared to anything else. I'm like, when this person meets me, is this gonna go well, right? Like that's what I'm nervous about. I'm not nervous about my ability to teach someone down dog and inhaling and exit. Like,
Yeah.
that is not that hard. You know, it's more of a personal thing. I think we get confused. You know, it all gets like wrapped up in our head sometimes,
Yeah.
you know. But, you know, practice makes almost perfect, right? The more you do it, less nervous you get. But yeah, I think a habit change kind of workshops would be really good, especially now. That's a little more hotter topic than it was a decade ago. People know those terms. There's been a bunch of books. People understand the idea of like sort of, you could even do workshops on being more efficient or being, you know, if you're doing it corporate wise, you might maximizing productivity. It's all the same, but buzzy words. I did a few workshops in New York, corporate workshops on sort of increased performance for like high-end, high net worth individuals who are interested in being even more high net worth, I guess. But it was an interesting thing. They were very interested. what meditation and yoga could do for them. So that was fun because they were super good students. And I got lots of private clients from those workshops. There's a guy that I taught with who does like a whole yoga for athletes thing. He was the Chicago Bulls meditation teacher, Kobe Bryant's meditation teacher, all these famous people. Same stuff, just like packaged different, you know, how do you keep up habits and sort of maximize your potential? He had been actually Julius Erving, Dr. J's roommate at UMass. So he's a basketball player who had some issues and then got into yoga and then sort of made a career doing that. I think he has a book called The Mindful Athlete. I think that's the name of his book. Everyone check that out. You know, there's that sutra that says, for the person who's basically yearns for it most, it sits there right there waiting for them. And for other people, there's like different results because they don't yearn for this like deep connection. So they're not going to get it. It's not that they're doing the practices wrong. It's basically that they don't care. And that's a theme in lots of texts that I talk about all the time because I think yoga people are super confused about this, which is most people don't care. They will not evolve and get enlightened because it's not in the cards for them. That's what the texts say. Either something wakes them up or they're just going to have to wait a few lifetimes. That's what the yoga texts say, right? It's not their moment because there's no motivation behind it. And that, but the big thing there is like, as a yoga person, what we need to realize is that that's okay. That's not actually a problem. It's like our own stuff that wants everybody to wake up at the same time. So even this idea of collective enlightenment is, I would argue, from a yoga point of view, is made up. Like, it's not really a thing. Yoga says things work in cycles. You know, so now whether you want to teach a bunch of actors to be better actors with no other purpose to the yoga practices, that's up to you. I'd like to think that introducing to people to present-centered thinking is going to have some sort of net positive effect on humans. Like people would be less awful if they were present. I would like to think that. I'm not sure that that's true, but that can get me up in the morning to teach anybody. I don't really think. Like my wife did a bunch of work with an organization with the Army, and there was this sort of internal argument of like, should you teach people in the Army these meditation techniques to enhance their jobs so that they could kill more people? Like that's the basic argument. And I would say, sure. I mean, this idea that none of them are gonna wake up, you know, a little bit and have a different viewpoint is probably flawed. Because in literally 2 days, you can read 3 books and learn everything there is to know about that. Because there isn't that much research yet. It's interesting, but in terms of what we know, I mean, we barely understand how the brain works. So there's that. 2, my main focus is actually practicing yoga therapy. Most people have 0 neuroscience knowledge, and languaging things about in a neuroscience format to somebody who hasn't taken a neuroscience course is not useful. People's language about their brains is emotional language. And that's the language we should be using. Same reason we don't language doshas and everything else. Super interesting. I read this stuff all the time and watch all the things. But I think there's been a little bit of a, you know, I go to the conferences and listen to everyone talk. And this is an opinion and you can disagree with it. That's totally fine. But for years, I've been listening to incredibly interesting speakers talk about neuroscience and then listening to the people that work with them tell us the studies they've done around it and how they work with people. And I've never gotten an ounce of usefulness in terms of practice from them. It's just all very interesting. So that's the reason, because Vesser Vandelko doesn't have anything to add to how we deliver yoga therapy, right? Like he studies why it works from a neuroscience perspective, but the traditions have way more usefulness and utility than the very limited Western understanding, right? So I just don't see the utility in it in terms of teaching you how to do yoga therapy. Now, if you wanted to be an academic, you're in the wrong school, because you should go to Maryland University and get a master's degree in yoga therapy. But what it is going to teach you is a lot about all the things, in a more academic way. So it's like any program, like you make your choices in terms of what you're going to like guide people towards. I learned from a guy who had spent the last 30 some odd years, like literally crying on his guru's sandals. And he was a great yoga therapist. I haven't met a great yoga therapist who's a neuroscience, not once, neuroscientist. So I'm just, in the end, you want people to get better who you're working with. So that is my argument. Sure, if I had unlimited time and money, totally. Totally, so that the 15% of students in our school who want to go down the neuroscience rabbit hole, I get it. I get it. And it has crossed my mind, but we have to make choices all the time. Your rational mind, which I have too, is super interested in this stuff. And I also read all the things, but you got to remember that you're reading them. The perspective they're coming from is so limited. It's like way too limited for the thing it's studying. We literally don't know why anything works in the body. We like literally have no idea how the body works still. And I think most people don't understand that. Like, we don't know anything. Like it's we think we know stuff, but we don't know. They're still studying. I mean, even nutrition, it's like ludicrous, right? There's just this massive study they did, sort of retroactively looking at vitamin D. Did anyone see this study? It's like brand new. And they're like, vitamin D doesn't work. It raises your vitamin D levels, but there are 0 health outcomes, right? That we can find in this massive study that are positive. After all that, I'm not saying that study's right, but it's just a good example, right? Like, we know vitamin D is important. And when we give people vitamin D, their vitamin D levels rise. But what we don't know is whether when vitamin D levels rise, if you get less cancer. And the answer from this study is you don't get less cancer. You just have higher vitamin D levels and all the same diseases. It's kind of mind-blowing, that study. I've been looking at it. I'm like, this is a wild study. Like, this is kind of cool. It may or may not be accurate or useful, but my point is that's where we're at with this stuff. We don't know anything.